Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. This one's going to be a little different from what I normally do. It's compiled of clips of the Explorer that I sold over the last 2 years of owning it, upfitting it with lights and sirens like what you see here. I'm going to walk you guys through the first version, which is what you see in front of you. The second version will be visible at the end of the video. And some of the things that didn't really make it into the other episodes are in this as well. So let me know what you all think. I definitely appreciate you watching. Check it out, and remember to stay gloved up. You might be wondering what all this stuff is that I've got laid out on the floor. This is all the emergency equipment that I'm getting ready to install in my 2020 Ford Explorer ST. I'm a volunteer firefighter in my department. I've been on for about 4 years now. Got experience in a couple other volunteer fire departments as well. And I'm permitted by my department to run red lights and siren per the Kentucky state law. I'm also allowed to have a radio in my vehicle, two-way radio, to communicate with our dispatchers and other first responders once they get on scene. So this is a visual layout of how all this equipment is going to look once it's in the vehicle. The thing that you can't see is all the wires that I have to install to connect all this stuff together. Starting at the back here, these two lights you see here, those are red Wayland ions. They will go on a bracket that mounts to the license plate and will provide a little bit of rear warning. The majority of my rear warning is going to come from this bar right here. This is a Dominator 8. It's made by Wayland. This is all in red, and while this does flash, it also does traffic. So what that means is if we're on the side of a road for a wreck or whatever the case may be, and I need to have some sort of blocking put in place for traffic, I can use this arrow or this traffic advisor to arrow the lights over to the other side, to the right, or just as general warning, it'll go from the center out on each side at the same time. The other bagged Wayland ions that you see here, those are going to go in the rear quarter windows down at the bottom and provide a little bit of side warning. I do not want to mount a full-size light bar on this vehicle, so everything you see here is kind of covert in nature or inside the vehicle. Those Wayland ions right here that are going to go on that plate bracket, I'm actually going to tint the lenses just a touch, just to kind of tone them down to match the gray of the vehicle. Moving forward, I have a Wayland HHS 4200. This is what's going to control the lights and the siren. This does absolutely everything. It's completely customizable. I can go into that a little further once I get everything installed. I'll show you guys how the handheld controller works, exactly what it does, and the programming on this thing is endless. You can pretty much, if you can devise a plan, you can program it into that controller. The box next to it, this is my two-way radio. This is a Yaesu FT7800. Now, I am licensed as a two-way radio ham operator, and this is primarily programmed for those channels. As of the moment, our county is still on a very antiquated VHF radio system, so I can program that to work as an emergency responder radio as well. According to the FCC guidelines, not really supposed to do that. It's more of a two-way radio than it is a public safety style radio, but it will communicate. It does work for our county and the dispatch center that we're using now. It works just fine, and there won't be any complaints to the FCC about that. Moving forward, we got another set of ions. These are going to be mounted on the rear door panels towards the B pillar, towards the front of the vehicle, again to sync with this light and this light together to give me a little bit of side warning, because this stuff over here you can't really see on the side of the vehicle, and all of the stuff in the front is the same way. So moving forward into what would be the driver's seat, you will see that I have a handheld controller here that goes to the Wayland 4200. Each one of those buttons either controls a siren or a light or a combination of lights. And we'll go into that a little further once we get it in there. This is the head unit, the controller for the FT7800 two-way radio. This is completely a remote mount. I can mount this anywhere in the vehicle. I've got a pretty cool location where I'm going to put it for now, and I will get to that once we move forward. The light bar that you see here, this large light bar that's connected, this is a Whelen FST inner edge. These are specifically designed to punch through window tint, and they are very, very bright. Again, all in red, except for these two inner lights right here, which are called takedowns. They are a bright, very spot-focused white light, and it's meant for doing traffic stops or working in front of the vehicle to provide some forward lighting for the safety of an officer that would be doing a traffic stop. In my case, it's going to be a supplemental warning that I can program to flash back and forth in a wig-wag pattern, just to give a little extra punch if I need it. It's not on all the time the way I've got this program right now. I've got that on a button where if I feel like I'm not getting through with the red lights that I have, then I can turn those on and hopefully get a little extra warning out ahead of me. And again, I can turn them on steady if I need to be in front of the vehicle, an accident, helping a motorist, whatever the case may be. It's just some extra warning. Moving forward from there, I have two siren speakers. These are the SA315s from Whelen, 100-watt siren per speaker. I do have the bracket for this. It's still in the box. These are specific brackets made to mount on the front of a 2020 Ford Explorer. They're made for the utility. There's going to be some differences on the ST. We'll get to that once we go to install it. Got another set of red ions. I just tied these together to do the programming to get the patterns correct. And then below that, we have dual ion Ts. These are the newest Whelen ions. These are a lower profile. You basically have two lights that are very bright inside one housing. And I'll show you guys where all this stuff is going to mount on the front bumper. Essentially, these are going to be kind of in the mid-level grille below the large upper grille. These are going to go below the fog lights. And with all of this to the front, it's going to be very, very bright and hopefully move traffic out of the way. Tripod to kind of point out exactly where the lights are going to go. Those Whelen ions, the smaller lights, are going to go down here in this lower portion. The surface mount light is going to go right here below the fog light. The speakers are going to be up here in the grill, back behind the grill pretty far in there. And my concern is this might be kind of a dead spot. Now on the police interceptors, this grill is lower profile, and some of them actually have locations where you can mount lights, LED lights, up here in the upper portion of the grill. The issue I have is this grill is very, very thick before it gets to the black textured piece behind it. If I put an LED up here and separate these two pieces and then put the LED behind it, I'm going to have to be very careful about where I put the LED so that it does still punch through this grill, but not block any kind of airflow or anything like that. I've got a very small window here, just like this big, and that's where a majority of the cooling goes through. Of course, I've got this lower grill down here that I'm also going to have those LEDs at the end. So now I've kind of blocked off some of the path that the air has, and I want to make sure that I've still provide enough room for the intercooler and for the radiator to cool off. So that's one of the things that you have to deal with when you're upfitting a vehicle is how do I fit everything in? Where can I put everything and not impede the performance of the vehicle or the cooling system? And as you can see on this thing, there's not a lot of room. Moving around to the back, those Whelen ions that I talked about, they're going to mount on a plate bracket. There's going to be one on either side that's going to be in this general area. Something that I don't have yet that's not in those diagrams is going to be a white LED light that drops into the tail light on either side and the reverse light. And that will be synced with this light on the opposite side so that you get somewhat of an X pattern as it's flashing back and forth. Now, that longer light is going to be right here at the bottom of the spoiler on the inside of the glass. So it's got to be very bright and punch through the dark tint on the back window. So that'll be another area that we've got to address. The angle of that, depending upon how this vehicle is sitting. Right now, it's not on level ground. We're going, it's hard to tell in the video, but we're going uphill. So that will be something I'll need to address. Once I'm inside, I'll actually close the door of the garage, see how that pattern hits on the garage door, and adjust that bar up and down to fit that. Floor mats are a little dirty. I need to do a vacuum in here. Normally on a police vehicle, you've got a very large console here. Your shifter would not be down here on the console. Your drive mode buttons and some of the things that are specific to the civilian market Explorer would not be here. You'd have a very nice center console. You would have no issue fitting a radio, a light controller, a scanner, any of the equipment that you would need as a first responder. There would be plenty of room for that. Now, when you move to the civilian market, you do not have enough room here, obviously. Some of the things that I had considered is doing away with the storage compartment, maybe taking the lid off, and then that would kind of open up the front part of this, which is a little dusty. That would open up the front compartment where I could put the radio kind of mounted to the bottom of this. I could go with a full-size light and siren controller with a slide switch. I like how clean this is, and I really, even though it's not clean at the moment, but I like the cleanliness of this console area, and I don't want to just take this door off and do away with it and, you know, potentially damage the value of the vehicle in the future. So I wanted to leave that on. So that's why I went with that handheld controller that I had showed you guys. The next major area of concern is where do I actually mount the radio, because that is kind of a large radio head. The cool thing about this, I can mount this display anywhere I want to. On the side here is a plug that goes to the mic, and on the back here is where it actually hooks up to that box that I showed you. So these two can be extended with extension cords pretty much anywhere. I could put this up on the headliner. I could put this, over in the glove compartment, or even hide it underneath this door. I had thought about putting it down here on the inside and being able to close the lid and conceal that when I don't, necessarily want anybody to know that it's here. My alternative that I think I'm going to go with for the moment, I'm going to put a bracket up here. Not necessarily a bracket, but like a suction cup that you would see for a cell phone. And I think I'm going to put this right here where I can see it. And the main reason, we operate on one channel for our dispatch and everything else. But there are several other channels that I would like to monitor while I'm in the county responding. The sheriff's department is one that I typically will monitor just to see if they're on scene or if they've got some other update before it gets to us. Another channel that I monitor is for our air evac helicopter that is in the area. That lets me know if we're going to a wreck or something like that. If that helicopter is already out on something else before we get on scene, we know that we cannot call for them. We're going to have to call for a different one, and we can avoid a potential delay by knowing that information before I get there. So that's why I think I'm going to put it right there. I can see the channels as it's scanning. Obviously, there's no speaker in this. There's a speaker in that rear control box, and I'll have to remote mount a speaker up here somewhere, which I'm thinking is probably going to go under the dash somewhere on this side or that side, or I might even put it down here under the seat and hopefully be able to hear what's going on. So you might ask, well, why not put everything in the center console? The console's very deep. It would fit all the equipment with no issue. The problem is accessibility, and how do I get to see what's going on? Again, I want to be able to monitor those channels and see, who's speaking on what channel. I don't want to have to open the center console to do that. Something I will do, and if you see this groove right here, I thought that was pretty cool that Ford put that in there, because you've got a 12-volt source in there, and I think, no, the USB's not in there, but you do have a 12-volt plug. Something I'm going to do is put the controller plug below that, and I have in the past got basically a plug that just, a receptacle that plugs into. Then that'll allow me to hold this controller in my hand, or just lay it here on the console, hit buttons as I need to, or I can even throw it over here into the cup holder while I'm driving, keep both hands on the wheel, and then I can turn this off once I get to where I'm going. but I like the idea that that little channel is there to run that wire out. So during the install process, I'm going to need to remove the console in order to get in there and access a spot to put that plug in, or the receptacle. One of the challenges that face modern upfitters is, where do you put all of the control modules and the equipment that it actually takes to run the lights and the siren? In my case, I'm going to use this as kind of a mock-up. This is a Wayland HHS 2200 handheld siren light controller. This is basically the brain of that unit. Power goes into this, comes out through the front. The siren driver is inside of here, so your sound actually comes out and goes to the speakers through this unit also. This is about, I don't know, 8 or 9 inches by 7 inches wide, so it's a pretty large unit. It weighs about 2 pounds. It's not really something you want flopping around in the back of a vehicle. I have done it in the past. I don't recommend it. I was lucky I didn't have any electrical connections come loose, but I also had it kind of tucked up in the corner of the Marauder behind the subwoofer. It didn't have a lot of room to move, so even if it did kind of come loose and move, it had nowhere to go. This Explorer is a little different. There's not much room back here. With this storage tray in place and the spare and stuff like that, it's roughly about 3 or 4 inches deep. I could lay that unit in there, wire it up, make it work. But the problem is, if I need to access the spare, I would have to unplug all of the connections to this control unit, set it off to the side, then get my spare and stuff like that out. So that's not ideal either. I went back here and started pulling apart everything because I'm looking for an area, and I saw on one of the Explorer groups on Facebook that a gentleman, another volunteer firefighter, had his control unit for almost an identical siren as mine stored behind this panel right here. With my ST, this is the upgraded sound system, so that is the subwoofer. His particular vehicle, there was no subwoofer there. It was just an access panel with like a little tab that you push down on. This whole panel would come out. Well, that's not the case on mine. That's a speaker grill, and I can see that there's a sub behind it. But I figured there was probably still a hole somewhere in this general area that I could mount it in. And after pulling this little side compartment off, I was able to get down inside of here and realize there's about a shoebox size area in here that I could mount that in. And I don't want to mount it directly to the floor. This is right behind the left rear wheel. It gets a lot of exposure, splash up, gravel, stuff like that. So it's not really something that I want to drill holes in the floor to mount that. So what I'll probably do is, there's 2 studs here, and I think that's for the police version. I know there's a battery access point back here on the interceptors. They don't wire that up for the ST, obviously. But with those 2 studs, I can find out what thread pitch the stud is, and then I can just build a bracket, basically come up off of the stud, go out 90 degrees, and then I'll be able to mount like a panel right here, and I'll be able to mount that control unit to it. Part of my plan right now is to use a Motorola drop-in cradle for this vehicle that I can drop my handheld radio, like my walkie-talkie, into, and then it will operate through that cradle, through the antenna in the vehicle, like a normal mobile radio would. Part of the package with that, they offered an amplifier, and it's about half the size of this box, but again, it's got some weight, some heft to it, and I got to find a place to mount it as well. It's going to go in there probably forward of this unit. What I'm kind of envisioning is the Wayland unit in the back, and then the front part, if this will clear up the zoom, there we go, the focus, that amplifier will be right there. Now what I've got to watch, I've got a module right there, and I've got another module right there, and I think that's a blind spot monitor. I'm gonna have to find out what that one is, because that's a little concerning. I don't want to put a lot of power, even though it is an amplifier, it's all sealed up. It goes through the antenna cable, but I really don't want a lot of power over here that could cause a disruption with one of the modules in the car. Part of that, I went ahead and popped off the other side of this to look inside of here to see what access I have, to see if there's another basically cubby hole under here. There is not. So With the rear air conditioning and heating on this vehicle, the evaporator and the heater core actually sit in a box right here behind this panel. It goes almost all the way to the floor. Basically what I'm saying, no room over here to mount the amp. That may be a problem, so I might have to address where else I can mount that amplifier, or if I can even use the amplifier. I mentioned in the first clip, the thing that you can't see is the wires that's going to connect all these lights together. These are low voltage wires. Everything in this is 12 volts. And these Wayland ions use very, very low amperage. So you can go with a very small wire to control power and ground for these lights. Now, they will be tied together in a flash pattern where this light and this light flash together, then this light and this light flash together in an X pattern, very similar to what I was talking about on the back. With that, I only need to run a power and a ground wire to these lights because they will be connected together on the front bumper, and then going back to the controller in the rear of the vehicle, we only need a power. The ground can be grounded on the core support, the frame rail, fender bolt, whatever I can find up here in the front. So we'll worry about that, but essentially we've got one wire that's going to come up to the front of the vehicle that's going to operate these lights. The next wires will be the siren speakers. Now, these Wayland siren speakers, you can put the white and the white together, the black and the black together, and you run those two wires to the back, and that is all you need to control those speakers. They use very specific, thicker speaker wire. I will need to get some of that and run those to the rear. So that leads 3 wires from the front of the vehicle to the back. The inner edge is quite different because it is a CAN bus system, what Wayland calls a WeCAN, meaning that all of the power, all of the function of the light bar runs through the 4 wires that you see right there. It's got a very long lead on it. I'll run that to the vehicle down the passenger side and then across the rear of the vehicle over to the controller. These wires, along with the speaker wire and probably the power wire, is going to come down the driver's side, mainly because on the front of the vehicle, the battery's on the passenger side, but there's a large fuse box over on the driver's side. Gives me a really good tap for the 12 volts that I need to run all this stuff. And I'm going to run an 8 gauge power wire from the battery all the way to the rear of the vehicle. These Wayland ions will be tied together on each side with those quarter windows. These will have to go through the door jamb and out to the rear of the vehicle. These will be mounted on the quarter panel plastics on the inside. Those wires will go down, meet up with those wires, go to that. And if you look, that looks like a huge spider just sitting there. But that's all the wires that control everything in this function. One thing I did not mention is I will need an ignition source wire coming from the front of the vehicle to turn this on so that it isn't on all the time and doesn't draw the battery down. Now, the reason I'm going to run that 8 gauge wire back here, obviously I've got a lot of lights, but they're low amperage. It really doesn't take a lot of amps to run all of this stuff. Maybe 15 amps. I could sit down and do the math, but I'm going to guesstimate about 15 amps. In all reality, I could get away with about a 12 gauge power wire coming from the front to the back. But I've also got a radio back here. And at 50 watts of output, I believe this radio is good for about 10 amps draw as well. So to simplify the wiring, to simplify all of these things, I'm going to run that 8 gauge wire back here to a fuse block. Individual components that need power, basically just the radio and the siren light controller, will have the ability to tap into that fuse block and run power over to them. The dominator that goes in the rear window, obviously we got a very long wiring harness that will just run over here to the HHS handheld controller. And this, unfortunately, is going to require me to drill a hole in the liftgate. I have not been able to find a good hole in the liftgate to run these lights up into the liftgate and through. So that's going to take a little bit of time. I'm not thrilled about that. But this car is not pristine. And this is some of the sacrifices that you have to think about when you're upfitting a vehicle. Are you okay with drilling holes in panels? Are you okay in drilling holes in body panels that are going to require a lot of work to fill those holes in the future should you decide to trade it in. I'm so happy with the Explorer. I plan to keep it for at least 3 to 4 years, and I'm okay with the depreciation of drilling a few holes in order to put this equipment in. So I have met my terms with that, and I'm okay with it. And that's what I have to do in order to ensure some safety by installing these lights. Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. The Explorer looks a little different from the last time that you saw it. I got the windows tinted. We went with a 50% tint on the windshield just to cut down on some glare. And then I had the front side windows, basically the driver's door, passenger front door, tinted to match the rear doors and the quarter windows. So it darkened it up a little bit. It's not overly dark. I can still see out at night. I still need to wear sunglasses when I'm driving during the day. So it's not completely dark, but it does take the glare off and it does help a little bit. Now, the lights that I'm getting ready to install up here in the visors, or in the visor area, will not be impeded by that tint either. So that's why I went with like a 50% tint on the windshield as opposed to a 35%. Just to kind of give you an example, on this Marauder, this is 35%. It's a little darker. Of course, on the sides, it looks a lot darker, and the fact that the windows are dirty, it looks really dark too. But 20% on the sides of the Explorer and 50 on the windshield is plenty dark enough for what I need to do. So let's move into the interior and get started installing the visor light. Step one to installing this visor is going to be removing the sun visor from the vehicle so that I can install the bracket that holds the visor in. And basically under this cover right here where this arm goes up, there's like a T15. And then at the other end, the clip right here, there's a T15 on it also. So I'm going to grab some tools and a drill with a T15 bit in it and come back when I've got that pulled off. All right, so I got that unscrewed. It was actually a T20. I saw a video by Night Garage and he said it was a T15, but I kind of figured it was T20. Ford uses a lot of T20s, but so you just unplug this little connector right here that goes to the light and to the keyless entry for the garage, like the garage door opener. With both of those out of the way, I can grab the bracket that actually holds the light bar in place, and this is what it looks like. This goes up here on the headliner and gets pinned between those mounts for the visor. So I'm going to put the clip side, the right side of it, in first to hold it while I get this other side up, because this bracket is kind of heavy. It weighs a little bit, so hang on a second. I've got that loosely installed. I can kind of maneuver the bracket around. I won't go back and final tighten everything until I actually get the visor light in here, but now you can kind of see that bracket holds the visor light into place right here, bolts to the back of the visor through this bracket. So we'll get that light in. I'm going to go ahead and put the sun visor itself back on and then come right back. All right, driver side bracket's in. Again, I don't have it tightened down all the way because I may need to adjust the bracket for the visor light itself. I went ahead and left that little cover off because I can still flip this up and down to do my final tightening and straightening procedure. So that bracket's in. We'll do the passenger side. All right, the passenger side comes out the exact same manner. Got it off. Now I'm going to go ahead and mount up that bracket that holds the visor light and then come right back. And just in case you drop the screws while you're working on this thing, the shorter of these screws is the one that holds the clip in, while the longer screw is the one that actually goes into the pivot or swivel end of the visor. Not that I dropped them, I just wanted to make a note for you guys. All right, this passenger side is installed, and you can see it's got a nice little Wayland sticker there. That's the bracket that holds the passenger side visor. So I'm going to grab it and start the process of holding it up and getting these very, very small screws started. Before I get too deep into this thing, I've got the passenger side mounted up. I had to adjust the bracket. That's why I left the bracket loose to the sun visor. I did have to adjust it to meet the visor light itself. So one of the things that you have to remember when you're dealing with modern vehicles, that you have airbags that come down from the sun visor, and they usually kick out these pillar trims, like the one that's laying up here. And on the Explorers in particular, they have these little rubber straps that hold the pillar to or the trim to the pillar when this airbag does deploy. So what I've got to do is be very careful about how I run my wire down through here. There's actually another harness tucked in back here. I'm going to go right next to it, but then make sure that I get all of these safety items hooked back up. And what I've done, I went down through the dash once I pulled that pillar trim off, and I've found a little passageway back here in the dash that I can run my wire through and then come out down here next to the kick panel. So that's basically what I'm doing now, is just feeding this wire up and through. And then once I get to that point, I can start to tuck my wire down here into the sills. Looks like everything's gonna go pretty straight and be long enough, but hopefully I've got enough cable. So we'll see once we get there. I've got the driver's side mounted up now. The passenger side's mounted up. Went ahead and put that A-pillar trim back together. Put all my kick panels and my sill plates and everything back together as well. What I'm doing now is trying to figure out a way to tuck the wire that goes between the passenger side and the driver's side visor up into the headliner. And it may be hard to tell in the video, but the gap is extremely tight, and it's so tight that I can't just tuck the wire up into it. So what I want to do is get it up behind this under the headliner and get it up out of the way so that it doesn't come out. So what I think I'm going to have to do is take the cover off of this and slip it under the front of the headliner and hopefully be able to put the cover back on without any issues. All right, so I got that tucked up in there. All I had to do was loosen the screws for the hooks, and then I could pop this cover off. I was able to tuck the wire up into the headliner and then put the cover back on. So that's all tucked up and good to go. So you've seen them from the inside. Now you get to see them from the outside. And this is where you can really tell that the windshield's got a little bit of tint to it. It's not much, but it's there. So now that they're mounted, I've got some wiring to do. And as I had mentioned in another video, I do not plan to show that wiring on camera, just because I want to avoid any kind of liability from someone buying a similar product and possibly damaging the product or damaging the vehicle. One of the lights I had mentioned is a Wayland Vertex, and what the Vertex is basically the old style hideaway strobe, except it's LED. There's 6 LEDs inside of that dome, and they're very, very bright. But essentially what we're going to do is pull the tail light, drill a hole that will fit into, and then reinstall the tail light to the vehicle. Now, when you do that, of course, you know, you don't want water getting into the tail light. There's a seal and this like washer that spreads out the force across this whole bezel, and that helps to, you know, obviously spread it out, seal it up so that it won't leak water. The water, when you wash the vehicle or it rains or whatever, runs right down this channel and will go directly up against where this needs to go. When I pull this, you're going to see exactly where we need to mount this. All right, I've got that corner off. You can see how dirty it is underneath of it. So now I'm going to set the camera down, pull this weather strip back just a little bit because the edge of the taillight does kind of overlap it. There's this rubber seal in here between the taillight and the body. But again, I need to put the camera down to grab this with both hands because it's got to come straight back. It's going to feel like you're going to break this thing when you go to pull it out, but you just kind of have to pop it out away from the body, get your finger under the lip. And there's pins that go in this way and this way, so you have to kind of pop it out away from the body and work this thing out. All right, there we go. So this little corner piece drops off too. That's seal. But you can see there's pins that go into the body this way, pins back here that go into the body that way. And of course, this is where your stud goes in And that's pretty much it. Now that I have the housing out, you can see where this bulb is going to mount in this flat spot right here. So on the interceptors from the factory, you can get an LED installed here. It's part of the lighting packages that they have. But being that this is a civilian model, of course, there's not a hole drilled here, and I'll have to drill that hole. 1 inch hole will suffice. That's as big as you need it to be. And then that still leaves you some area here to mount that washer and the seal that comes with the Vertex, so that this is completely sealed up. Back in the day when we would put strobes in, we would also run a bead of silicone around the outside. The strobes actually had a rubber base that they would sit into, and they would almost pop into the hole that you drilled. With these having the flange on there, it makes life a lot easier because, one, you don't have to be 100% precise with the hole, but also you don't have to worry about getting that messy silicone and making a mess back here trying to get it to seal up. Now, if I ever decide to take this stuff out, or if I have to, seal this hole up for whatever reason, I can get some aluminum duct style tape, not like duct tape, but the aluminum style tape. And I can seal this hole up with that aluminum, and then I can go over top of it with silicone, and it'll never leak. That's typically what I do when I go through a vehicle and I take everything, all the emergency equipment out. When I get to these housings and have to pull these lights out, I always seal them up with that tape. I've yet to have one leak or cause any issues. So I'm going to get my drill and my 1 inch drill bit and unfortunately drill a hole in this very expensive headlight or tail light housing. Using that 1 inch hole bit, I drilled that hole right there. And most modern headlights and taillights are double walled, meaning there's an intersection with the reflector, your outer housing. So I had to drill through both of those, which made it a little weird. This inner wall kind of flaps around right here. I would assume, again, on the interceptors, it's got a piece that looks like it's removable on the inside, but I didn't want to try to break it and then break it up into a bunch of pieces and get it out of these two small holes. Left it, held it in place with my pick while I drilled, and it turned out just fine. Next step is to drill the pilot holes for the screws that actually hold the Vertex to the housing. And what I did is took the washer that they provided, laid it up here, and then marked my pilot holes with a Sharpie. I'll drill those out 3/32, and then that will allow me to start the screws that actually hold the Vertex to the housing. And with that, I put the 2 screws in with my foam gasket you can see squished out from the side. So now the Vertex is installed. You might be asking, okay, well, what are you going to do with the wire? Well, that's relatively easy. We've already got a grommet back here for the original harness to go through. So what I'll do is I'll come up to the upside, the top side of this grommet. I'll poke a little hole in there, and I'm going to run my wire from the Vertex through. Then I'm going to zip tie the controller for the Vertex, which is this piece right here. I'll zip tie it to this wire, probably right here in this area, so that it's out of the way and so that it doesn't kind of bounce around and make a bunch of noise back here. And that will still leave me plenty of wire to reach the Vertex in case I need to take it out, or, if this harness ever goes bad or something crazy like that. It makes it relatively easy to kind of pop the wiring out for the Vertex, set it off to the side, and then obviously reinstall everything. So I'm going to set this in place and show you what it looks like when it's activated and on. I grabbed my temporary power source, which is a Milwaukee M12 3D printed battery adapter. Grabbed this off Amazon for like 25 bucks. I'm going to hook this up to the power wire so that you can see the flash pattern and you can see how bright it is. So this is my flash warning for those that may be affected by flashes. Go ahead and hook this up. And it's very bright. The camera does not do this justice. When you get down to it, it is a super bright light. Of course, white in color, no red in this one. And I could go in here and add a second one to this, the turn signal bulb if I wanted to. Initially, I thought a red in the top and a white in the bottom would be pretty cool. have them flashing back and forth. That's still an option. May do that in the future. That's the cool thing about this stuff is you can kind of customize it, add and subtract as you want, change colors as you go, whatever you want to do. So the only thing I've got left to do, obviously run my wires in. And as I stated, I'm not going to show you guys the instructions on how to actually hook up the wires to a controller or to a switch or something. That's going to be something you'll have to learn on your own for liability reasons. But for me, I'm going to tuck that wiring up into the quarter panel, zip tie that controller, like I said, to this harness, and then just go ahead and put the tail light back in. I'm very happy with this. I'll adjust the flash patterns once I have the rest of the wires in here. The lights will sync to the other lights that I have. So once we get a little further into the process, I'll be able to kind of sync everything together. So that's going to be it for this video on how to install the Whelen Vertex into the 2020 and up Explorers. I hope that you enjoyed what you saw. If you did, hit the thumbs up. If you want to watch the rest of the videos in this series, I'm going to have a playlist put together for that. And make sure to hit the subscribe button if you like looking at Explorer ST content and or emergency vehicle content. So that'll be it for this one. Remember to stay gloved up. Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. I'm going to show you guys how to install a Whelen Hideaway LED into the taillight housing of my 2020 Ford Explorer ST. This will also work for 20 to 23 Explorers in any trim model besides the Police Interceptor. And it may work for some of the Police Interceptors that don't have the lights in them. Quick disclaimer, I am allowed to have lights and sirens because I'm on a volunteer fire department, and I am allowed by the chief to have those under our state law. You need to check with your local jurisdiction on what the legalities are, if you're allowed to have these or not. There are some that will tell you that you can have certain colors and not. So again, that is something you need to check with your local state laws and local laws about. I'm allowed to have this under Kentucky's law, so I'm going to show you guys how to install this. If this looks like a lot of fun, then upfitting is for you. To get through the firewall of this vehicle to get power up here to the battery, to that siren controller in the back, one of the things that I saw online was to drill a hole over here in this indentation. I do not like to drill holes in firewalls. If I can avoid it, I will. I'll look for grommets like this, very large grommets that have areas on the sides that you can run the wires through. In this case, from the inside under the dash, I could see this grommet, but I couldn't see where it was because the battery tray sits right here in this area. Battery sits on top of it, and there might be an inch or two between the battery tray and the firewall right there. So there's just not enough room. I didn't have time to really film this. It was more of an exploratory surgery situation more than it was anything else. But this entire fuse block, or not really power distribution block is about the best way to describe it, sits on top of the battery. All of these 5 connections here made up to that distribution block. This is your positive terminal that sits in that block, and then your negative is down here, and it bolts onto the battery as well. But so you can see I've got the cowl off, I've got the battery tray out, I've got a ton of stuff all over the place in here just so I can get to that grommet and run my power through. So while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and run my wires for my speaker, and I'm also going to run a couple of wires forward out of the cab so that when I get to the point where I'm ready to install my grill lights and anything else that I'm going to put on the front bumper, I'll have those wires through the firewall already. So I'll make extra long runs of those. I'll tuck them up here with the battery, and they will be ready for a future install. So I've got the wires through the grommet now. I just made like an X in the grommet with a razor. I have a fish tape, which is a very thin metal strip that sticks through. And then basically I just tape the wires to that fish tape, pull it back through. And what you want to do when you are taping these wires on, say this is my fish tape, this screwdriver, I would lay the wire on here, tape it around several times, basically the length of the screwdriver, and then kind of step it up where it forms like a cone shape, kind of the tip of the screwdriver, so that when you're going through there, the rubber spreads apart and allows room for the wire to get through. That building up, I mean, you really don't want to build up more than 1/2 of an inch, so you kind of stack the wires as you go. This other cable is going to go to all the lights on the grill and the front bumper. I added an extra circuit. That's what this small red wire is, just for something else in the future. And then I've got my speaker wire, which is this is a very thick speaker wire, and it's good for the siren speakers. But I stacked all that up so that it never really was more than 1/2 of an inch thick or so, and that way it doesn't try to blow out the grommet and cause any issues. So now that I've got all this done, now I'll pull the wire through. I'm going to bundle up this extra circuit, wrap it up, tape it, and hang it back here out of the way somewhere. The other 2 wires, this will head up front to the grill area so that I can put my lights in when I'm ready to pull the bumper. And same thing with the speaker wire, I'll wrap that up. I've got all the interior panels pulled out of the back of the Explorer, and I'm getting ready to mount my siren controller, the HHS 4200. This does siren and lights. And normally you would just use some self-tapping sheet metal screws to go through the holes and screw this to the floor. Well, the problem is on these newer Explorers, they're made out of boron steel, which boron steel is much stronger than regular steel. You can see this small hole that I drilled right here. That took me 2 different drill bits to get through. And what I was trying to do was mount this fuse panel over here on this side to keep it out of the way of the spare tire, which it's kind of hard to tell. It's barely out of the way. I'll trim this bracket a little bit. But I basically made a little L bracket out of some ABS plastic and then mounted it to the 3rd row seat frame. That was the only way I could figure out how to mount that back there. Now, the other problem that I face, I can't just screw this to the floor like I'd hoped to. So basically what I'm going to have to do is the same thing, is make an ABS or wood panel to go into this cubby right here so that I can mount that controller and then mount the radio in this area right here. Luckily, there's 2 studs back here that are threaded that stick up through the floor. And then I've got another mounting point on that module right there. So if I can come up with basically an ABS floor that's going to fit in here, bolt down using these 2 points, and then make another bracket to come up to that point, I'll be able to mount that controller and the radio without actually having to drill through the floor, which I do not like drilling holes. I was very cautious when I drilled that one. This is hollow. This frame rail is hollow. There's nothing inside of here, and there's nothing on the bottom. So that's something that I looked at when I was getting ready to drill too. So I'm going to get some cardboard, make a template for that, and get to work. Grabbed some cardboard and made a template, and it's kind of rough, but it worked because I'm done with the template, and I've actually got my ABS ready to drop in there. And while I was cutting this out, I thought, you know, there's a little bit of foam and stuff down in there. I really don't want this ABS panel just kind of rattling around on the floor. So I dug through some of my old stuff. I found some foam, like weather strip. And what I'll do is stick this onto the bottom side of my ABS panel just to give it a little cushion while it's on the floor. And it's also going to space it off the floor a little bit too, because like those screw heads are raised, those grommets and stuff like that are kind of raised up off the floor. This will provide it a little bit of space so that when the screw actually goes through that, it's not like tapping on the floor, and hopefully it'll cut down on vibration with that weather strip also. So I'm going to get that mounted in there. Just kind of drilled my holes a little larger. It gives me a little wiggle room once it's in there. These studs, in case anyone is installing anything back here, these are M6. I described a couple of really basic nuts and washers, and that's what I'll use to screw those down. What I'll do is put a little bit of that weather strip around the bottom of these studs just to kind of give it a little bit of cushion as well so that it's not rattling around. But like this foam stuff expands and it provides a little bit of cushion. And the way that I've got that situated in there is it's going to be supported on this side with that foam and whatever this little plastic bracket is on the floor. And then from there, it kind of comes up. It's supported by this seam sealer here. I don't know if I'm going to make the bracket to go up here or not. I think all of the weight being forward and having a couple of mounting points, it really won't need the bracket in the front. It's going to be enough weight to kind of sit on the floor without causing any issues. I might put some double-sided tape or something up here in the front on this frame rail support just to kind of give it a little bit of adhesion, but it really shouldn't need very much. So I'm going to get to work on that and get that mounted in there. Well, that was a lot of work, but it's in there. I've still got to route all the wires and get this bolted down, but that's the radio on that side, the siren controller on that side. They're both mounted to that ABS panel. I did put some of the weather strip on the bottom to cut down on the sound. The radio still needs to be tightened down to that bracket, but otherwise, it's very solid. I don't think it's going to rattle at all. It doesn't seem like it does. With all of the weather strip and the foam and stuff underneath of it, it really shouldn't make any noise. So now comes the fun part of wiring all this up, and like I've stated in some other videos, I'm not going to show you how to make all of these connections. I'm going to go ahead and start to clean up this wiring and get everything bundled together. I've still got a couple more wires to run over here to this stuff. So I've got my work cut out for me. That's going to be it for this portion. Now I've got to do the hard part. One of the upgrades that I had planned for the ST, basically from the time that I bought it, I started doing a lot of research before that, but I managed to find a used intercooler, an upgraded Whipple intercooler, to get rid of the stock unit. And if you can see the difference in size, the bottom of the Whipple is basically at the bottom of the stock intercooler, and just kind of using a calibrated eyeball, that is nearly 1/3 of the size of the Whipple. So this is going to help with heat soak. This is going to keep the air intake temperatures down so that when you're out driving around in the hot or performance oriented, this is going to cool off the air going into the engine much faster. So it's a really good upgrade. It is kind of expensive. Again, I got this one used. That's why it's kind of dingy and dirty. I'll get this cleaned off before I button the front end back up. But I just wanted to show you what this thing looks like. So I'm going to ditch the stock intercooler, throw it off to the side, get this cleaned up, and then I'll work on getting the bumper back together. This is one of those things that I had the bumper off for another reason, and just needed to go ahead and knock this out while I had the bumper off. One of the options that this car has is the upgraded B&O sound system, and part of that upgrade is this 8-inch subwoofer that's tucked away back here under the side trim panel. And not to knock it, but that is the smallest magnet I think I've ever seen on a subwoofer in my life. I mean, it's basically just a very thin paper cone speaker, and I was back here pushing on it, and I don't think it's supposed to make that noise. So we're going to upgrade this with a Kicker Comp 8-inch subwoofer, and I apologize for the glare, but this, and I'll link the model number to this down in the description, but this sub can handle a lot more power. It's got a neoprene or a rubber ring around the cone. The cone is very good material, and the magnet is just massive. So this is going to be a much better sound upgrade. The only modification, I got to take this ring off in order for it to fit in the enclosure. And then of course you've got your speaker clip adapters that need to be adapted from the factory harness to what would normally be speaker ends, but I'll clip these off. And these kickers actually use a push connect where you push those connectors in and the wire goes in place. So I'm going to work on that and get this thing tucked back in. So it's the next day and I've got much better lighting now, but I've got the subwoofer installed. Basically just use some self-tapping sheet metal screws to secure it to the housing. The ring that goes around the outside will no longer fit. This subwoofer is much thicker around the rim than the factory one, and plus that ring I think would just cause a little bit of vibration between the housing and the subwoofer. Overall, I'm very happy with it. I mean, yeah, I did have to modify it a little bit. The outer ring of the subwoofer did need to come off, which it's just glued on there. Again, no big deal. It definitely looks better. That magnet being larger is going to make it sound better as well. So I'll link the part number that I used in the description down below. I pulled that from one of the ST owner groups on Facebook. So a big shout out to the guy that posted it up in there when he did his, because that was a huge help. I don't remember his name right off the bat. I'd have to go back through and search for it. But the Explorer ST owners group on Facebook, that was where I got this. So like I said, I'll link this part number and the clip adapters in the description down below. I'm going to move on to the next thing on the list. Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. We got another package in the mail tonight, and this is a couple of weeks after I filmed the video about the coaster and the cup holder inserts. This is from a friend of mine over at Stebbins Garage, and I'll link his YouTube into the description down below. Bill's been doing some 3D printing for automotive applications for a couple of years that I know of, probably much longer, but at least that's what he's shown on his channel. He has a CTSV that he's done some stuff for, Focus ST, and 92 Firebird, I believe, that he's restoring, and he's done some really cool stuff for those cars. And he had contacted me because he was wanting to do some emblems for the ST community, wanted to see if the emblems would be the same for the Explorers as they are for the Focus. We took some quick measurements and they looked to be the same, so he sent me over some of the emblems. Now I haven't opened these other than just cutting that right there. So there we have it. These are the Stebbins Garage ST emblems. Now, when I talked to him, I told him that I wanted to do a paint match on my vehicle. So the emblem itself is printed in black, and then we've got the center section here. And I believe Bill said that he can do these in multiple colors. But he sent me these in white, and what I'll do is I'll prime these and sand them down, and then I'll paint these inserts the magnetic color of my 2020 Explorer. So I'll have to do some adhesion promoter and a couple of special steps to make that paint stick to this, and then of course base coat, clear coat. The base of the emblem is a very nice gloss black. The texture inside of it's actually pretty cool. It wouldn't hurt my feelings to just paint the inside of this gray and let that texture kind of show through the metallic. But otherwise, I'll glue these inserts into the emblem itself after they're painted. And then these just double-sided tape onto the vehicle. I'll lay these onto a piece of double-sided tape and trace them out. So I'll take one of these over to the truck, kind of show you where it goes, what it's going to look like. I'll lay it over top of the one on there, and then we'll see what these are going to look like when they're done. So it's a little dark out, and I just walked up to the car, and it's making noise because these things can sense when you get close to them. But essentially, I'll pop that emblem off, do my paint match, and then pop this one on. I know it's dark out and it's kind of hard to get the idea, but this is chrome and red in the middle and doesn't really match the theme of my vehicle. I'm going for more of a blacked out view. Like I've got my emblem plastic dip black until I can get around to buying a black emblem. What I want is the center paint match to the car and the Ford script and the ovals in black, but we'll get to that later on. For now, this is going to be a really cool addition once I get this painted and put on there over top of that ST. I think it'll look pretty cool, so I'm looking forward to that. So again, thanks to Bill over at Stebbins Garage for sending these over. I'm going to get these painted up and get them installed on the car, and I'll come back once I've got them on there. We'll check it out in the daylight too. Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. I bet you're wondering why I've got the interior of this thing all tore apart. This is my 2020 Explorer ST. Well, a few weeks ago, after a pretty decent rain, I went back here and I noticed I had some water that was running down the side panel in the back, and I really couldn't figure out where it was coming from. The headliner didn't feel wet on the bottom side. It didn't really seem like it was leaking around anywhere here in the back. And the only thing that I noticed was the grommet where this power lift cylinder comes through the body was a little loose. So I've sealed that up and I've got it good and sealed. I know it's not leaking because I washed it the other day. And I left the panel that goes up here at the top loose so that I could feel the backside of that grommet. So we got no water. And we got a storm that moved through last night. So the first thing that I did this morning, I came out and as you can see, there's water that's run down this rear panel again. I pulled down the sunroof. I had to take this weather strip off. This panel was still loose. I pulled down, not the sunroof, the headliner, and I peeked up in there and I could see a trickle of water starting about right here where my finger is. And it ran all the way back to here. This was all wet when I first dropped this. Where it originated from, if you see that orange coupler right there, this is the back of the sunroof frame. And it's not really focusing too good, but this is where the tube, the drain comes out of the frame. Orange coupler meets the drain tube. Drain tube goes over top of the airbag, down the C-pillar. That's a little better in focus, but right there is where all that is. That's where the water seems to be originating from. One of two things: either this tube is clogged, the drain is clogged, or I've got a bad issue going on back here with the sunroof where it's just leaking somewhere. So I've got to figure that out. I need to drop the headliner to do that. Really, I have 3 reasons I did this. On to the second one. These roof racks are pretty much useless if you have the panoramic sunroof. And the reason being is Ford says you can only put 75 pounds up there if you have this this panoramic sunroof, which I do. So by the time I get a carrier and the crossbars and all that stuff to put something up here, I'm really not going to be able to put more than maybe like 30 or 40 pounds in that carrier. It's not really going to do me any good. I don't take this on long trips. If we're going as a family somewhere, we take an expedition. It's an extended expedition. Plenty of room in it. I can load the roof of the expedition up. So this is not the primary like travel vehicle. It's never going to get used. So because of that, I'm going to delete those racks and just go with flat moldings like what the police Explorers have. And you'll notice I changed over to some winter rims. We'll get to those in a minute. These are the roof moldings. There's a specific part number for the driver's side and the passenger side. I'll put those part numbers down below with links to Tasca Ford. That's just where I find the best deals on parts. This is the rear piece of trim that goes in the back. This is a piece that goes up here in the front. You have to change these 2 pieces. Actually, this comes part of the longer molding where the roof rack is deleted. This has to extend out further for these moldings to attach. So this little piece of trim mounts right up here in the front where these 3 bolt holes are right there. And the easiest way to access that, honestly, drop in the headliner, and then there's like 4 or 5 10mm nuts that hold all that stuff in. So that was that's the second reason of 3. 3 of 3. This is a 2-way radio antenna. It's actually hooked up to a Yaesu FT7800, which is the radio that I have mounted on the dash of this vehicle. That radio is insufficient for public safety use for several different reasons. I mainly use it as a scanner and nothing more, so I can monitor those frequencies while I'm on calls. This does really well, but the maximum power output of this is 70 watts. I have a Motorola radio that I'm going to install in this vehicle that outputs 100 watts. Now, some of you 2-way radio guys or somebody that's familiar with it, you may say, why do you need 100 watts? Well, we live in a very hilly part of the country. We're in like north central Kentucky. There's a lot of little hollers and dips and valleys and stuff. It's hard to get out. The more wattage you have, it helps you get out of those situations and reach the radio, which is part of the issue that I have with this radio is it's underpowered for what I need it to do. And then second of all, it doesn't really work good as a public safety radio. So I've taken care of that. I've got a Motorola. I might show the install of it. I need to move this antenna from here to a more suitable antenna location just forward of that shark fin, AM, FM, GPS, yada yada, the factory antenna. So the center rib right there, I'm gonna find a spot on that center rib that is also cleared by the bracing that's in here. So you see this roof brace right here that goes across the middle. I don't want to drop my antenna right through that, so I'm gonna have to go forward of that brace there, or just about there is probably gonna be the best spot. And I'm gonna have to clear this sound deadening material that they put on the roof also. So my spot's gonna be right there, or just forward of that roof bow. So that's why everything's tore apart, and I'll start knocking this out step by step as I figure out where the water's coming from, as I get the roof moldings on, and then finally I'll show how to put that antenna up there on the roof. There's another YouTuber, Knight's Garage, and he did a very excellent video on how to change out these moldings, how to get to the bottom of the roof rack, how to drop the headliner, all the things you have to do. I'm not going to go through that step by step. In fact, I'm just going to link his video down below. Trust me, if you're going to do this, watch his video. He does an excellent job. It's not worth me redoing something that he's already done, and he did a fine job. So kudos to him. Thanks so much for putting that video out there. That really helps. That content is what YouTube's all about, showing people how to do things like this and not really wanting to charge for it. So thanks, Knight's Garage. I'm going to link that down below. So while I had the roof rack off, I went ahead and cleaned that channel out just like he did. And then I'm going to come back after I've got that on, show you guys what it looks like. So I've managed to dump a little bit of water on the outside of the glass. And I'm up here, and the part that you can see in front of you that kind of tapers down with the white sticker on it, that is the drain that runs along the back side of this panel where it meets the body, and then it dumps the water into the side channels where the drain is located right there at the back. I've got a little bit of water back in that channel, which is good. I can feel it dumping down into the main part of the drain there. I'm not seeing any water back here. And the frustrating part about this, when we have just a normal little bitty rain, it's no big deal. It seems to only do this when it absolutely pours rain, which means I have to put this all back together, get this thing into a position where I can be inside of the car, and then just have somebody stand outside with a hose and just run water over this thing until I can, find the leak in here. So I'm in an awkward position, and I'm going to have to unfold myself to get out of here, but that's where I'm at as far as the leak goes. I might not be able to figure out where this water's leaking from, but I've got the roof moldings done. This thing looks really good. I'll give you a side profile once I get this completed 100%. So on to part 3 of my task for this weekend. I'm going to go underneath and find a spot to drill a hole up through this rib. I want it centered in the rib, and then I would really like to get this as far forward as I possibly could, which would put it closer to the middle of the car instead of being back here and getting possible interference off of the satellite radio and the regular antenna. I think it's going to put me somewhere right about here, and hopefully that's far enough forward that it won't interfere with anything. When you're installing two-way radios, ham radios, anything like that, you really need to drill through the roof. And I know it sucks. I'm not a big fan of it. I really don't want to drill through the roof of my $55,000 Explorer. It's the only way I'm going to be able to transmit with any kind of decency or clarity. So, when I go to sell this thing in a few years, they make a plug that goes in that hole. I mean, I can drop the headliner, I can get back there. They actually make some that screw from the top to plug them. So it's not like it's going to be a constant source of a leak. If I do start to notice a leak from it, I can unscrew it, because when I drill this hole, and I'll show you when I get to that point, but there's a threaded piece that comes up through the roof, and that allows you to take the antenna mast on and off without actually having the antenna wire drop back down into the vehicle. So when you install that right, you should be able to take the antenna mast on and off, like to go through the car wash or to just inspect it and make sure it's not corroded and seal it. So that will allow you to obviously put some silicone around it and seal it down to the roof, which they have O-rings that come with them that seal it to the roof and the painted surface, but we'll get to that point here shortly. So I'm going to go inside and I'm going to find a spot to drill this hole and then just bite the bullet and get it done. This is definitely one of those times where you know you have to do something and you really don't want to do it. Yeah, I went ahead and did it. So I've got, this is a 800 megahertz low profile antenna, and I just screwed it on there to make it look like it was sitting there. But as you can see, the insert that comes through the roof of the car has threads on it. Now this centerpiece, let me zoom up here. So the center part of this is threaded as well, and the hole is actually only about 3/4 of an inch wide, and the rest of this is almost an inch, I guess, maybe just a little bit over. But so this part here sticks up through the skin of the roof. This outer ring has a rubber seal on the bottom. These threads are really, really tight. I don't think any water is going to get through there. I can always come in here and just put like a little bead of silicone and rub it around the edge of the threads, which I'm probably going to do just to prevent any kind of possible leaks. And then this particular antenna doesn't have it, but some of them have a rubber O-ring that goes around the outside here. And you just screw this on, literally. So you can change the mast of the antenna. You can take it off for like a car wash, something low profile like this. Honestly, it's maybe just 1/4 of an inch taller than the shark fin that's on here for the radio and the GPS and everything. There are some companies that make low profile shark antennas. I've found one on eBay. I've got it on the way. There are some that are even, I guess, more or less conspicuous, however you want to say it, less smaller profile, not so obvious, that do multiple bands, which would be cool to do a bunch of different radio bands. Those things are made by a company called Styco, and they start off at about $450 to $500, way more than I want to pay. You still have to drill a hole. You're just drilling a smaller hole, which is a non-standard mount. And if you have any issues with that antenna, you get to spend a whole bunch more money. This style antenna right here, they're very inexpensive. The antenna that actually goes into the car and goes to the radio, it's like 15, 16 bucks. This outer part, the mast, if you will, these are roughly about 20 bucks. So, and you can swap these out for different lengths and stuff. Right now I've got that glass mount over there, which is eventually going to come off, and we'll go to this. So that is part 3 of 3 of why I needed to drop the headliner on this. My roof moldings are done. My antenna is done. Can't figure out where the leak's coming from. I'm going to have to do some more testing on the sunroof. But now I just get to put everything back together. And again, I want to reference back to Knight's Garage. He will show you absolutely everything that has to come apart and go back together. He's not going to show you, obviously, how to drill a hole in your roof for an antenna. I'll come around here to the other side and I'll show you what the bottom side of that thing looks like. And I picked a spot right there in front of that bow. I've got my antenna cable routed over here to the sunroof, and I'm gonna just kind of lay it up there on top of the sunroof mechanism, maybe throw a couple of zip ties, and then run it down the pillar over here. I did lay a mat up here to collect some of the metal shavings. I drilled from the inside out, so most of it went up on the roof. I used the shop vac to pick it up. So from here, this has no end on it. It's just a bare cable. I'll put the end on that goes to the Motorola radio, and then start the process of putting all of this back together again, which is going to be an absolute joy. So for now, that's going to be it for this episode of Gloved Up Garage, as I go and put the entire interior of my Explorer back together, because I have somewhere I have to be tomorrow afternoon, and it's 9:30. I got to leave here tomorrow at about 12 o'clock. So I'm going to thrash to get this done tonight. I just wanted to take an opportunity to give you guys an update on the Explorer and what I was doing to it. So again, thanks for all the support. I'll see you on the next one. Remember to stay gloved up. To house all of these controllers and radios and everything that I'm going to need, I purchased a Havas console, and this wasn't too expensive. In the grand scheme of things, it was like $500, but it makes integrating all this stuff so much nicer because this console is made for this vehicle. My factory shifter moves up here, drive mode, parking brake, all that stuff gets moved up here to the front instead of being kind of spread out all over the console. Now, I did lose my ambient lighting and my cup holders. In theory, if I got real fancy, I could go back and put those in. And then I also lost my wireless charger. I don't know about you guys with STs. I don't use that thing. I don't really like it. It doesn't seem like it works very well. So to me, being deleted doesn't really matter. I still have my 12-volt accessory plug. My USB plugs are over here as well. And then on the back side of this thing, it actually integrates the HVAC control for the rear seats, and the rear heated seat buttons and all that stuff is integrated. One thing I did have to do was modify the console to fit the 110-volt plug, and I will get a new cover for that in the future. But you know, the HVAC controls down there, the rear USBs, all that stuff is integrated into the console. There's a bunch of extra room on the inside of this thing, so if I did want to add, you know, a flashlight charger or some sort of holder or something, there's plenty of room back here for that. And I will eventually trim this floor mat to fit that console a little better. I think this summer, once it warms up, it'll kind of conform to it, so not super worried about that. I've got wires run all over the place up here, and I'm going to clean all this up. I've got to make a decision. I'm probably going to put the controller inside the console at the very bottom. And one of my reservations about that is the neutral override is in the bottom of the console. It's already going to be a pain to get to if there was like an emergency and I need to put it in neutral, like car broke down or something. So I'm going to have to keep like a T20 bit in the car so that I can remove some of these panels, get down there to it. I'm going to have to keep a lot of slack in the wire if that controller goes down in there. The third thing that really bothers me is you can see I've got cup holders in there. So yeah, I mean, it's my daily driver. I get fast food in this car. If I was to get, let's say some sort of fast food and the drink, you know, the lid came off the drink, or if there was an